Good evening and welcome to our 5th episode of our program, Going Back to Your Roots. My name is Princess Dipuo, the President of the South African Royal Kingdoms Organization, SARCO. Disclaimer, if you are a person that is not open-minded, this program is not for you. If you are a person that is not willing to research, this is not the program for you. If you are a person that is not open-minded and is not willing to know the truth, this program is not for you. And we would appreciate it very much if you could subscribe to our channel so that it could help us to keep on bringing you the programs. It will go a long way in helping that. Let us recap on our previous episodes. We had said a tree that has been removed away from its roots can never grow. We have also said it is only a fool that can buy vegetables from their own garden. We have shown how religion has been used to colonize Africans. We have shown how in South Africa, the Afrikaners, the Boers, how they started the Dutch Reformed Church and how they justified apartheid using religion to say they are the Israelites, they are the chosen people of God. They come from one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and God gave them this land, which is South Africa. So religion has been manipulated and it has been used over centuries to manipulate who we are. Today we are going to focus, and the question is, who are the Israelites? Who are the Hebrews? Who are the indigenous people of planet Earth? We have shown that Europe, during the Iron Age, it was actually an ice. There was no land. But in Africa, we did have land. In the previous episodes, we have shown that when the first Europeans arrived in Africa, in Egypt, in Ethiopia, Egypt being the baby of Ethiopia, Ethiopia is the mother of Egypt. When they first came, it was in the 13th dynasty, when the first Europeans came into Africa. And at that time, Africa had civilization. We could read and write. We had engineering. We had agriculture. We have architecture. We had books. We had libraries. We had built universities. So we had everything. We had a democracy in Africa. We just didn't use the names that Europeans used. It was our way of living. We have shown in the past that Christianity, it is our way of living. It is an African way of living. We just didn't call it Christianity. We didn't have a name because it was our way of living. However, when Aristotle came into South Africa and he saw and he actually established that in Egypt there was a library which had more than 7,000 books. And he started learning. He started learning the way of Africans. And then he decided that, no, he's going to rewrite this whole thing. And today he's called the father of philosophy. But he learned it from Africa. So today we are going to be looking at the origins of the Bible. Origins of the Hebrew. Who are the Hebrews? Who are the Israelites? Like we have said before, the Hebrews, the Israelites are African. Let us begin by defining what is the Bible. What is the Bible? Where does the word Bible come from? A Bible is a collection of books that have been put together. In the beginning, it was 24 books, and then the Old Testament ended with 39 books. Now, that is what the Bible is. It's actually a sacred, accepted, sacred literature of books that has been put together. It has to be accepted as sacred. And what is sacred? The sum of little books. So the Bible is made up of independent records, which is 66 books that are accepted in the Christian faith, that they are sacred, meaning they are set apart. Now, the Greek word for Bible is biblos, and the Latin word is actually papyrus. What is a papyrus? Papyrus is a form of a plant that grows in the Nile River. And what our ancient Africans used to do, they would take this plant, beat it up, and then it has some glue inside. The bark has some glue inside. And they would take this glue and they would start putting and gluing all the papers together. That is how they started to create books. So Africans were actually the first people to create a paper. So the word paper comes from papyrus. And what is the papyrus? If you look at the picture, you can go and Google it. If you look at the papyrus plant, it looks exactly like the top of your spine, the bottom of your brain, which is called the medulla oblongata. It looks exactly like that. And then in the ancient African ways, it was called kama. So it was called kama in the ancient African. So that is why at that time we have what we call the papyrus scrolls. That's when the Bible began to be written. But it wasn't up until the Hebrews were actually captured. They were captured to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar II. He's the one that captured them. So during their captivity, that is when they really began writing the Bible. During that time, they were actually captured for 70 years by Nebuchadnezzar, and because they were forced to sing a song, and how can you sing a song when you are away from your land? I'm sure some of you remember the song, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, there we wept, when we remember Zion. It was actually Africans. It was not Europeans. Because when Aristotle went into Africa with Alexander the Great, when they conquered, they actually saw the people that they found there. And in his writing, he says, when they arrived there, they found black people. So he literally saw them. So Hebrews are actually black people. Israelites are actually black people. History shows that. And Europeans that were from Russia, from Germany, and from England, when they came looking for food, then they studied, they learned the African way of doing things, and then they went on a mission to eradicate and to steal and to take away what was African. There's a book called The Destruction of African Civilization by Chancellor Williams, by Dr. Chancellor Williams. In his book, he says, for you to be able to learn anything about Africans, the first thing that you need to do is to understand African religion. He continues to say, when Europeans set their foot into Africa, they were wise enough to realize that the only way for them to be able to colonize Africans and to conquer them and to capture them and to enslave them, the only way to do that was to actually understand their African religion. Because African religion is literally a way of living. Now, if you understand African religion, you literally understand how Africans live. Now, if you capture that, then you would have captured the Africans. And this is what they did. They went on a mission of making sure that they capture and right what was not theirs. And when they went into war with Africa, the Europeans, the first thing that they would do was to burn their libraries. Because they knew when they burn the libraries, when they burn the capitals, then people will not be able to, the generations after will not be able to reconnect and to know what was happening. So that was the first thing that they would do, is to burn the libraries. Now, when they came into Africa, like I said, they started writing the Bible when they were in captivity in Babylon. According to Aristotle, the Bible originated in Egypt, where the civilization was black, and that is where all mankind received their early civilization, culture, and religion. And this was 3,000 years ago. What we call Hebrews or Israelites are actually black people. When Aristotle arrived in Egypt, he actually saw that the people that were there were Africans. So, but the Bible originates from Africa. And when they went to Africa, when Aristotle, Herodotus actually was the first to go into Africa, and he went into Africa between 484 BC and 425 BCE. That is before Christ, BCE. That was the first time when a European stepped their foot into Africa. Between 484 and 425 BCE. And then Aristotle came after that in 384, between 384 and 322. He came with Alexander the Great. They conquered Africa, and then Africa began to be under the Greek influence. So when Africa began to be under the Greek influence, what Aristotle did, he actually studied. When they came in there, they found a library that had more than 7,000 books. And this library, he started reading from this library and he started writing down. And today he's known to be the father of philosophy. Yet all that philosophy he got from Africa with Alexander the Great. Now, that is the origin of the Bible. The word Bible is described as a book or a collection of secret writings accepted by Christians as inspired by God. A collection of secret writings accepted by Christians as inspired by God. So which means the Bible is just a collection of books that were written by people. The Old Testament started with 24 and it ended with 39, and the total book is 66. That is the collection of books put together, and they are accepted by Christians as inspired by God. There is no proof of that they were inspired by God, because they were written by people. So which means these are records that people were writing and putting together, and it's now called the Bible. Where does the word Bible? Because in the Greek word, it's called biblos. So it's derived. Remember, the first people to start writing were the Greeks. And where did they get this? And the word for Latin is papyrus. And what is a papyrus? A papyrus, it's a plant that grows in the Nile River that looks identical to the medulla oblongata. You mean the medulla oblongata is actually at the top of your spine, at the beginning of your brain. And that is supposed to be the controlling center of the brain. And they call it the papyrus. What they used to do, they used to take the plant and beat it up, and then inside they would get a glue, and they would take this glue and they'll start placing papers together to actually create a book. And that is where the word paper comes from. And for centuries, Africans have been dominating the paper industry, because they were the first people to actually make a paper to write. Africans. And I said in Greek is biblos, in Latin is papyrus, and in Asian Africa is kama. And remember, we spoke about the papyrus being the spine and the medulla, the controlling center, and in Asian Africa it was called kama. So that's where the name Bible comes from. So let us look at, when was the Bible written? It is said that Moses is the author of the Torah, of the 5 books, the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So he's the author of that. But let us look at, when was the Bible written? When did Moses come into the picture? When was the Bible written? It is said that the Bible was actually the first 5 books, the Torah, was actually written by Moses, which is your Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. But let us look at, when did Moses come into the picture? And it was in 1280 BCE, when Moses was in Egypt. Remember, in our previous episode, we have shown that in the archives, in the history, in the records of Egypt, there is no records that says there was a baby, a child called Moses that grew up in any of the pharaoh's homes. There is no record of such. There is no record of a Joseph that was a governor in Egypt during the pharaoh's time. There is no record like that. So Moses actually went into Egypt in 1280. And by the way, Moses and Abraham were Africans. They were Hebrews. Hebrews were African people. Like we have said before, when Aristotle wrote, he said he saw with his eyes black people. And remember, when the Europeans went into Africa, their mission was to use African religion to capture and to conquer and to take over the land of Africans. Now, if Moses came into the picture in 1280, let us examine as to when are each of these books written. And let us look at the scriptures. What are the scriptures saying? And let us examine if really it was Moses that wrote. Because really the Hebrews were captured and they were kept into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar II. And when they were captured and they were taken away from their land, that is when they started to write. And they were captured for 70 years. And during that time, it was a very difficult time. All that they could do was to actually write their history. And they were black. I'll keep repeating that they were black. They were not Europeans. So we're going to look at what the scriptures are saying. We have established when Moses was in Egypt. And let us look at, we've looked at what the word Bible mean. Let us look at the word testament. It is a Greek word. And the word testament only started coming into the picture in 155 BCE. Oregon, who was an African man, who was the first people that became the bishops of the African men. And he was a bishop between 185 to 254 BCE. And Titalium, who was also a bishop, who was between 155 and 230. They were the Africans that started using the word testament in the Bible. Before that, the word testament was never used. So they were the first Hebrews to actually use the word testament. And let us look at what is testament. Testament is an agreement. It is a contract. So it is in the Old Testament, it was the contract between God the Creator and the children of Israel, who are the Hebrews, who are Africans in the Old Testament. And in the New Testament, it was an agreement between God and the rest of the world. So the word testament is a contract. It's an agreement. So those are the things that we need to understand. At this point, we must remember that in the African civilization, in the African religion, in the indigenous ancient Hebrew world, Israel, Africans did not have a dispute in terms of religious beliefs because they believed in one God, the Creator. The notion of having different denominations and conflicts came in when the Arabs and the Europeans started invading Africa. Because the Arabs, who were Muslims, so it says that the Muslims are God's chosen people. The Christians, the Israelites, the Jewish people, they say the Jewish nation are God's chosen people. Now, all of these wanted to capture Africans and to enslave them. And all of these, both Muslims and Jews, stole from Africans. And there was no conflict. Because remember, Africans were one, from the one creator, with one religion, with one democratic governance. So there was no conflict there. Even though there were differences culturally, but there were minor differences which were brought about the geographical location of where they found themselves and the language as they move and migrate and intermarry and all that. But there was no actual conflict between Africans when it came to the belief in God and the African spirituality. Now, because there was no conflict, the colonizers or those that wanted to capture Africa had to find a way of actually capturing the Africans. So the easiest way was to actually conquer their religion and to make sure that they capture it and they actually destroy it and reconstruct it and redesign it to suit their need, which is to capture and conquer Africa. Now let us answer the question, when was the Bible written? It is said that the Bible has been written by Moses, who came into the picture in 1280, like we have said. But let us look at scriptures now. Genesis 13, verse 7. And there was a strife between the headmen of Abraham's cattle and the headmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanites and the Perizzites dwelled then in the land. The Canaanites dwelled then in the land. Now, if it was Moses that was writing, he wouldn't have said they dwelled then on the land. Meaning, at that time, when this was written, they were no longer there on the land. Okay, and let us look at Genesis 12, verse 6. What does Genesis 12, verse 6 says? And Abraham passed through the land unto the place of Shechem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanites was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, their seed will I give this land. And they are building here an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. So when he got there, when he was passing through the land, and the Canaanites then in the land. So the Canaanites were already there. The Africans were already there when Abraham came. Remember, Abraham preceded Moses. Don't forget that one. And then we go to Genesis verse 36. Genesis chapter 36, verse 31. Let's hear what it says. Verse 31. And these are the kings that reigned the land of Edom, before reigning any king over the children of Israel. And these are the kings that reigned in the land of Edom, before there reigned any king over the children of Israel. Now, during Moses' time, Moses didn't even know that the Israelites will have a monarchy. When did the Israelites, the Jewish Israelites, develop their monarchy? Because remember, the people that have always had monarchies were Africans. When they came in, when Moses came in, Africa was already in its 12th dynasty. So they were the people that had monarchies. Europeans didn't have monarchies. So there's no way that Moses could have written that. Moses might have started to write Genesis, but he didn't complete the book of Genesis. If you look at Genesis 36, verse 31, let's read it and hear what it says. It says, and these are the kings that reigned in the land of Edom, before there were reigned any king over the children of Israel. Moses left in 1280 to go and do the sheep business with his father-in-law. There he began to write about the history of his own people. However, the actual writing of Genesis started in 444 BCE, and it was completed in 90 AD at the Council of Jamnia. At the Council of Jamnia, 70 scholars, Jewish scholars, Hebrew scholars, were brought in to actually write Genesis, the Bible. And these Hebrew scholars had a problem, because remember, they had to translate an African language to Greek. Now imagine translating an African language to Greek. And they had problems when they were translating this. They had problems of translation because there were limitations of words in the Greek language. So when they had to translate some of the words from the Hebrew, they couldn't find them in the English language, in the Greek language, when they had to transfer them. Now, you must remember that the Egyptian language, the Ethiopian language, and the Hebrew language are all Bantu languages, all three of them. Now, here are these Hebrews translating Bantu languages to Greek. Now, there was a problem there. And one of the biggest, for an example, in the Hebrew language, when we look at the verse, let's go to Isaiah 7 verse 14, just to give an example of the problems that they had with the translation. Let's look at Isaiah 7 verse 14. To look at some of the language barriers that the Hebrews had when they had to translate from the Bantu language to the Greek. Let's look at Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Now, in the Hebrew language, there is a difference. There is a Alma. Alma is a Hebrew name for a virgin. A Hebrew name for a virgin is Alma. And then we have Batula. Batula, it's what they say when a woman has actually had relationships but is not married. Now you see, there's a difference. There is Batula. This is a woman that has had relationships but is not married. And there's an Alma who is a virgin. But when you came to the Greeks, they only had one word, which is virgin. So they used what they had. So in essence, when we get to it, you will realize that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was actually not a virgin. She was just not married. But because of the limitations of the translation of words moving from a Bantu language to English and Greek, that would give them a problem. So that is where the translation problems began with the Bible. the Bible has been written by human beings. And anything that starts involving human beings have the capacity of human error, particularly when you're moving from one language to the next. Imagine moving from a Bantu language to a English language. You can imagine the limitation of words there. So those are some of the problems that the Hebrew translators had when they were actually translating the writings from the Hebrew language to the Greek to actually compile the Bible. And so the Greeks did not write the Bible. They made a lot of, they actually translated, they made a lot of translation, but they didn't write it. They didn't write the Bible. And the word Genesis in Hebrew is called Bereshit. Bereshit. In the beginning. And the word Genesis, it's actually a Greek word which means the origin or the beginning. That's what Genesis means. Now, remember the Hebrews went into captivity under Nebuchadnezzar. They were taken off their land and they were taken to Babylon. And during that time, during the 70 years that they were there in Babylon, because they went into Babylon and the Persians, took over from the Babylonian, and the Persians were there until 331 BCE. And during that period when they were in captivity, they started to really write. And if you look at the time they were in captivity and the time of Moses, you can see that there's a difference there. Let us look at the Book of Solomon. When was the Book of Solomon written? The Book of Solomon was written in 250 BCE. And the Book of Ecclesiastes was written in 150 BCE. And the Proverbs were written between 600 and 200 BCE. So it took 400 years to actually write those books. And all of these books were attributed to King Solomon. The book of the Psalms of David. David lived in 100 BC. The Psalms, the compilation were written between 500 and 100 BCE. Again, this was a compilation over 400 years. The book of Ezra. The book of Ezra came into the scene in 444 BCE. Ezra is the one that actually wrote the book of Genesis, Ezra. And he came into the picture in 444 BCE. But the book of Ezra was actually written in 250 BCE. And the book of Esther. The book of Esther, there was a lot of debate around it because it was a romantic novel, whether it should be put into the Bible as inspiration of God, because it was a romantic novel. And the book of Esther was actually written, Esther was born in 470 BCE, and her book was written in 125 BCE. Now you can see that it took over 1,000 years to actually write the Bible. Over 1,000 years. And it was written by people. And people think that when they say it was a book inspired by God, it's like people have this perception that someone would be sitting there and God will be talking to them and they will be writing. It is not like that. It is people that were writing what has been written. Some of them would look at it and start adding. That's why we have so many versions. It's like you taking a book that was written by someone and do a new edition on it. So it evolved like that over a period of 1,000 years. Over a period of 1,000 years. So with this translation that was happening, initially the Old Testament, like we had said, testament is actually an agreement. In the Old Testament, there were actually 24 books. And then with the 70th version, which is called the Septuagint, the 70th version of the Bible, that's where they added and made them, they added other books which made it 39. Now, when Egypt was colonized by the, it had two Egyptians. There were the Asian ones and the Israelite ones. Now, the Asian Hebrews actually accepted the 39 books. However, the Israelites, the Palestinian Hebrews accepted the 39. However, the Israelite Hebrews refused. They only went with the 24 because they said the other 9 were actually added. They were not there in 444 when the completion of the Bible was done in the Council of Jamnia in 1990 AD. So they refused to accept them. Adding to the problems of the translation, the Council of Jamnia, which took place in 90 AD in Alexandria, Egypt was split into two. There were the Palestinian Hebrews and the Israelite Hebrews. So the Palestinian Hebrews actually accepted the additional 14 books that were added to bring it to 39 books, the Old Testament. However, the Israelites Hebrews refused. They said they're not going to accept them because they were not part of the writings of the spiritual scriptures that began with Ezra in 1444 BCE. So there was that division between the two. However, the Catholic Church accepted it, accepted the 39 books of the Old Testament, and to this day we still have those 39 books of the Old Testament. So Jesus, having coming from a lineage of warriors, when he came into the scene, he came in to liberate the Israelites and to find freedom on their land. Jesus didn't come to bring us the good news. He came to liberate the Israelites on their land. And the only good news, gospel is a good news. The only good news for people that have been taken away from their land and for people that are not free and that are captives, the only good news is liberation and freedom. That is the only good news that they know. Even when God created the world, before he could create man, he began by creating land. So from Genesis to Revelation, the whole book called the Bible, it's about a people, an African nation, a black people fighting for their land. In the book of Genesis, God created man and made man land and put him on the land. During the time of Adam and Eve, God put them on the Garden of Eden, which was on the land. In the days of Noah, Noah had reigned for 40 days and 40 nights. And he waited for 150 days for dry land. And he went and settled on a dry land. On the Tower of Babel, when they decided to build this great building to the heavens, they were building it on the land. When Abraham goes to Egypt, he gets permission to settle on the promised land. When Jacob came up with his 12 sons and settled on the land that Abraham lived, and they now go down to Egypt to keep from starving, and they stayed there for 430 years on the land. After Moses, when Joshua fights the fight in Jericho, he was fighting over the land. All these years spent under the judges, for 200 years under Simon and other kings, the conflict has been over the land. All the kings have to rule over kingdoms, and kingdoms are over the land. They are government. So all the kings that were fighting during that time, they were fighting to govern their own people on their own land. When they were taken to Babylon in captivity, they were moved away from their land, and their land was burned down, their capital was burned down, and they were moved from their land. And they had to go back to their land after 70 years of captivity. When Judah's Maccabees rose up to rebel and organize a revolt, this was liberation of people to go back to their land. So when Jesus enters the scene, after such a glorious tradition and history of warriors fighting over land, what do you think that Jesus was fighting for? The kingdom of heaven. And what is a kingdom? A kingdom is a government, and government rules over land. So he too was fighting for the land. In the book of Revelations, it says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and the first heaven and the first earth was passed away, and there was no more sea. So John was seeing, he saw the city of New Jerusalem set out of God, and from heaven it landed on some land. So from the book of Genesis to Revelation, the whole book called the Bible, it is all about the struggle of a people, African people, Hebrews, fighting for their land. To this day, in South Africa, apartheid was orchestrated and designed by the Europeans, the Caucasians, and they captured the African religion as usual. And they, until today, are holding on to 87% of the land. We need to understand that the fight for land has been an ongoing fight from the first dynasty. Because even amongst ourselves as Africans, even before the first European stepped their foot into Africa, we were fighting amongst each other and capturing each other in order to make sure that our kingdoms are strong and capturing land. So it is all about land. You cannot separate a people from their land. Even when God created man, he started by creating land for the man. So the fight for land is a real fight. African people must realize that Africa belongs to them. That Christianity is their way of living. That Christendom has cut them off their roots, and they need to go back there. Homosexuality in the African culture was introduced by the Greeks. When the Greeks took over from the Babylonians during the time of captivity, they introduced homosexuality to the Africans. The Greeks would even build gyms, and in their gyms they would be walking around naked. We didn't know homosexuality as Africans. It was introduced by the Greeks. The destruction and the introduction of the dark world, the introduction of homosexuality in 331 BCE, when the Greeks took over from the Persians, that is when homosexuality started in Africa, and they had to take the mark of the beast. So it started with the Greeks when they took over. We didn't know that in Africa. Thank you very much. We are going to leave it at that. We will see again next week, Wednesday, when we are doing our 6th episode. Thank you very much.